So we're in our aircraft at gate 42C at Birmingham Airport. Just get that out. So here we are. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to switch the aircraft on, how to do the air traffic control, as well as they'll tell you what altitude to initially climb to, but also they'll also give us altitude readings throughout the flight, as well as our final descent into Bristol Airport. During taxiing and the flight, I'll also point out different controls that I'm going to be using and what each one does. Like I said, this is just what I do when I fly. You know, there are loads of controls here. I use probably about 10% of them. So like I said, it's probably not the proper way to fly it, but it's what I do and it seems to work. So first things first, up at the top we have our internal batteries, BAT 1 and 2. So I'm going to switch them on. Down a little bit we have our external power. If it says AVAL or available, switch that on. If you don't have that available, all that means is outside you haven't got an external power hookup. You don't always need this. Down to the APU Master SW, we're going to switch that on and also start. And now we're going to wait until this shows available. While we're waiting, we'll get our air traffic control set up. So we're going to tune Birmingham clearance and request IFR clearance.
Birmingham clearance delivery, Easy 112 ready to copy IFR clearance to Bristol.
Easy 112 is cleared to Bristol Airport as filed. Take off runway tree climb and maintain 10,000 feet. Departure frequency is 118.775 squawk 4156.
So I'll go through that in a minute, but we just need to read back and acknowledge the IFR clearance.
Easy 112 cleared to Bristol Airport as filed. Take off runway tree climb and maintain 10,000 feet. Departure on 118.775 squawk 4156.
Easy 112 read back correct. Contact ground on 121.805. Good day.
Okay, so just going back, so all we've done here is we've requested IFR clearance to Bristol. ATC has come back saying that we're cleared to Bristol Airport, take off runway 33. This is what we're interested in, so climb and maintain 10,000 feet, so that's going to be our initial altitude. So if we come down to the main console, we have this ALT or altitude reading. So on the little knob in front, we're going to select altitude and drag that up to 10,000. If the altitude is 10,500, for example, you see there's two parts to this. So this changes the altitude and this changes it by 100 or 1,000. So at the moment it's on 1,000, so we can go up and down in thousands. Change it to 100 and then we can go down or up in hundreds. So we're just going to keep it on 1,000 for the moment. Going back to the top, we've now got the available on the start. So we're just going to work our way up and go APU bleed on, external power off, and we're going to turn on the 6 fuel pumps. That's all for the top. We're now going to get the engines turned on. So down the bottom we have the engine mode selector. We're going to switch that to start, and then we're going to turn engine 2 on. On your screen we can see that engine 2 N1 will start to go up, and we're going to wait until that gets to about 19.5 N1, and then we can start engine 2. So as you can see, the N1 value is starting to increase. While we're waiting for that to happen, we can go back to air traffic control and request our taxi. So we're going to go to Birmingham ground, and request taxi IFR.
Birmingham ground Easy 112 tree with India ready to taxi IFR. Easy 112 tree taxi to and hold short of runway tree using taxiway Whiskey Delta Delta 6 Delta 7 Echo 2 Sierra Tree Sierra Sierra 2 Sierra 1. Contact tower on 118.305 when ready.
And then just acknowledge.
Taxiing hold short runway tree using taxiway Whiskey Delta Delta 6 Delta 7 Echo 2 Sierra Tree Sierra Sierra 2 Sierra 1 Easy 112 tree.
So that's now our taxi. So if you go to the outside view, we now have this blue, what they call taxi ribbon. This is guide us to runway 33. So we're at 19.5 N1 on engine 2. So we're going to go back down and we're now going to turn on engine 1. And again, we're going to wait until this gets to 19.5 N1 before continuing. While we're waiting for that to happen, I'll go through a few of the other sort of components here that we're going to be using. So right in front of us, we have our primary flight display. The important things that we're going to be looking at on the left-hand side is our airspeed. There are certain values that I will call out as we take off and as we're cruising. The middle section shows our pitch. So at the moment, so if you imagine the little dot is the nose of the aircraft and these are the wings. As you can see that we are currently looking at the horizon. As we take off, we're going to be looking at between 10 and 15 degrees nose up. And then coming for landing, we should hopefully not have to go under the horizon. We should be looking at about 0 to 5 degrees for the landing. But I'll go through all this as and when we get there. On the right hand side is our altitude. So at the moment we're at 330-ish feet above sea level. And there's our 10,000 marker that we set here. As and when you approach that, it will come down on the reading here, and that will just help us gauge our height. The second screen is our navigation. So this green line is going to be the flight route that we're going to be following. I'm not going to be using autopilot on here. Two reasons for that. One, I prefer to hand fly the aircraft, and two, I don't know how. So, so we're going to be flying this manually. It's only a short trip down to Bristol. This is our flight route, and just in the top here we have our ND range. So if we imagine Google Maps and you're zooming out, that's all that is. So if we set it to 40, it just means that this outer line is 40 miles away, whereas that is now 10 miles away. So I tend to start on about 40 if it's a short route, and then as and when the airport starts coming into view, you then go down to 20, and again when it comes into view, go down to the 10, and that is what we'll be using for landing. We've talked about the engine display. The top panel here, we've talked a few things, so I'll just go through the last few things. So we've got the QNH, this is our altimeter meter. So as you're flying, certain ATCs will call out altimeter to 9.92. That just helps you calibrate your altitude. So at the moment we're on 2992. If they, for example, say, oh, altimeter is 3010, all we're going to do is on the barometer, I can't even pronounce it. On this knob, we're just going to drag it up and change the reading. And if I just go down a bit, if you look at this value here, as I change this, it starts changing our altitude. So we want to make sure that's set correctly. That changes the zoom in our primary flight display. As we get closer to landing, there are two buttons we're going to be using. We're going to be switching on approach mode and also the ILS information display. Now what that is going to do is on our pitch indicator, it's going to give us a square purple box, and that's our glide slope, and that's what's going to help us guide us in on a 3-degree glide slope so we land nice and smooth on the runway and we don't end up nosediving. The only other thing to point out is the auto thrust. So we're going to be using auto thrust quite a bit through this flight. The only bit we don't use it for is the taxiing and takeoff, but once we're on the initial climb, we'll then be using auto thrust for the remainder of the flight. And that's pretty much it. So going back here, we've got both engines on 19.5 N1. So we're going to go up to the top. We're going to turn off APU bleed, turn off the master SW, and then just turn the engine selector to normal. And that's it. The aircraft is now on and ready to go. Great view that. So the next stage is taxiing to the runway. So we've got our taxi route behind us. That blue ribbon going to runway 33. So we're going to turn the parking brake off. Make sure our throttle levers are on idle. And now we're going to request a pushback. So we're going to go to ground services and request pushback.
Birmingham ground, easy 112 tree requesting pushback.
Easy 112 tree pushback request accepted.
And that's going to attach the tug at the front of the aircraft to help push us back. From here we can tell the push tug to stop, steer left, steer right. So because we're going to be wanting to face to the left, we're going to be going back and to the right. So I'll let it push us back for a bit, and then I'm going to ask the push tug to steer the aircraft to the right. So now I'm going to do the request pushback, steer to the right,
Birmingham ground, easy 112
and you'll
tree
see the
requesting
aircraft
pushback
start to
tug
point
steer
towards the
aircraft
runway.
to the right.
Easy 112 tree, your request has been transmitted to the operator.
And then we're just going to go stop.
Birmingham ground, easy 112 tree requesting the end of pushback.
Easy 112 tree request and pushback received.
And now we're just going to wait for the pushback tug to get out of the way before we bring the throttle up a bit and start our taxi to the runway. So we can now begin our taxi. So we're going to bring the throttle up only slightly, just to get us moving, and then we're just going to control the throttle manually, just so we're not going too fast. Now one thing with the A320 aircraft is, one thing I've always struggled with is knowing, how do you know when you're straight to a runway how do you line up. So luckily on the A320 there's a little visual cue, so this sensor screw here, as long as that's lined up on the runway you're going to be straight. So that's what we're going to try and do with the taxi ribbons. So the yellow lines on the floor are the taxi ribbons. So we're just going to try and keep that going towards that screw as much as possible. So as you can see, that line's going quite towards that screw, and if we go on the outside view, we're almost certainly dead straight. That's what we want. And what we're going to do is, when we get to the stop line, we're going to reduce the throttle down to 0, we're going to apply the brakes and bring the aircraft to a stop, and then we're going to request takeoff clearance. So we're going to bring it down to 0, and we're just going to put the brakes on, bring it to a stop. Now at this point, ignore the taxi ribbon. I don't know if it's just my game, but it tells us to go on a line up facing the wrong way. So yes, we are going to ignore that. Air traffic control, go back to clearance, tune Birmingham Tower, and request takeoff clearance.
Birmingham Tower, easy 112 ready for departure runway tree IFR to Bristol.
Easy 112 altimeter 29.9 to Windcom. Cleared for takeoff runway tree.
And then acknowledge takeoff clearance.
Cleared for takeoff runway tree easy 112.
So that's what I was on about here. So easy 1123. So that's our airline. That's our call sign 1123, and altimeter 2992. So that's what we set here. So that's all good. So we can now taxi onto the runway. So again, we're going to bring our throttle up a bit. I always like to look down the runway from the cockpit view. And then we're going to slowly line ourselves up to the center line on runway 33. Again, using that sensor screw as our guide. Throttle to 0, apply the brakes. So we're lined up with runway 33. The last thing to go through is the flaps. So just here you've got your flaps lever. There are several modes. The ones we're going to be using is 25%, or what I could just call first set of flaps. That will be our takeoff flaps. As we begin our initial descent, once we get to our final descent, where we're going to be going at a slower airspeed, we're going to be using the second lot of flaps, as what that does is it helps generate lift so that the aircraft can fly at a slower speed in readiness for landing, while also keeping your altitude. And then as we start the final descent to the runway, we'll then use flaps 3 and 4. and that will help control our speed and descent for hopefully a smooth touchdown. So for takeoff, we're just going to be use flaps 1. So everything is set up. So that's the switch on and taxi to the runway. And the next section is the takeoff and initial climb.